to Tabletop Tactics and welcome to another video about the Grotmas detachment bonanza. These detachments are coming thick and fast now, and a lot of them are coming out with multiple detachments on a day, so we're trying to condense them together as much as possible to make it easier for you to get at the information. So I'm going to go through the Adeptus Custodes in just a moment, and then Beard later in this video will be covering the Imperial Agents. Much like a sneaky assassin, they've snuck into the end of this video. There will be chapters below in the timeline if you want to jump forward, because that's the kind of bit of the army that you're interested in. However, if you want to check out the Custodes, stay tuned because I'll cover that in just a second. The Adeptus Custodes Solar Spearhead. This is quite an interesting detachment, and it's something that was sort of missing from the Codex. How spicy it is, only time will tell. And whilst I do really like it, I do think there's a certain restriction in just the models that are readily available for use, but let's dive into it. The rule is auric armor. What that effectively does is give all of your Adeptus Custodes vehicle units +2 to their OC, unless they are aircraft or battle shocked. That is quite nice at making your vehicles a little bit more, having a bit more presence on the board. Given, as a Custodes army, you're only going to have limited models anyway, so making them able to hang on white knuckles to objectives for as long as possible is very useful. We also then have a similar rule to where we've seen elsewhere, insofar as Adeptus Custodes vehicles, if they are under full strength, get reroll 1s to hit, and if they are under half strength, then also get reroll 1s to hit and wound, which is very nice, especially because they are vehicles. They're more likely to hang around at the half strength or below marker than something that is just, say, a character or just a little unit, and they will have some decent weaponry. In addition to the auric armor rule, there's also Imperial Agents. This is very interesting. This is what makes me excited about this detachment. It gives you +2 to move, +1 to advance and charge rolls for Adeptus Custodes walker units. But what is a very deadly cherry on top of this quite interesting cupcake is in the muster army step of building your army, you can select 2 Adeptus Custodes walker units and make them characters. Make them characters indeed. So that effectively means you can kind of have a March of the Ancients version of Custodes, where you can take loads of dreadnoughts and 2 of them can be characters and be warlords. Now that's important when we get into the next part of this video, because that means they can take enhancements. Speaking of enhancements then, the first one is the Adamantine Talisman. This gives you +1 attack, strength and damage to your melee weapons, which is very nice on something like an Achilles Dreadnought or something of that caliber, because suddenly it's moving faster and it's chopping harder. We also have Augury Uplink, which is for an Adeptus Custodes model only. The bearer has a 5-up feel no pain, which is very nice, but given you can make a Dreadnought a character, you can give it to that. We then have Honoured Fallen as an enhancement, which is an aura. This can only be put on vehicle models, so it sort of means you can't put it on a shield captain, but you can put it on your vehicle characters, which is a mad word to say. And it gives an aura of allowing Adeptus Custodes infantry or Adeptus Custodes mounted units to have a reroll hit rolls of 1 within 6 of that unit. This is quite nice, because given you're hitting on 2s most of the time, having access to a reroll 1s to hit aura is very nice. So maybe on something like a Telemon that can hang a bit further back, or a Contemptor with a decent weapon or a good gun attached to it, they can kind of sit back, weather the storm a bit, but then buff up all of your shooting Custodes, maybe your Pyrothite Spears or something like that. Rounding out the enhancements then, we have the Veteran of the Cataphracti. It allows an Adeptus Custodes infantry or Adeptus Custodes mounted model to bestow the ability of the enhancement within 6 inches of the bearer to a vehicle or mounted unit, so it can fall back and then shoot until the next command phase. It is quite useful, but I think some of the other enhancements might pip it to being as effective. But it is relatively cheap, and it's nice to just have on a shield captain on jet bike or something like that, so they can zoom around the board and then get things out of dodge, so then they can shoot where they want to rather than having to get stuck in combat. Moving on to the stratagems then. It's quite a good toolkit here, but does rely on potentially buffing up some of the vehicles, especially the faster moving dreadnoughts in this detachment, to get the most bang for your buck. The first one is Flawless Construction, and this is quite nice. It allows you to pick an Adeptus Custodes vehicle unit and give them a -1 to be wounded if the strength is higher than the toughness, and that usual wording we've seen from 10th edition. This is very nice, given that generally speaking, to deal with a vehicle, you kind of got to shoot a pretty big gun at it anyway, so it's likely going to benefit from that -1 to wound. Death by 1,000 cuts will still be a weakness to them, but if it's death by 1,000 cuts, there's got to be a lot of cuts, because you're probably quite a strong vehicle. We then have the Emperor's Vengeance, which I really like. You can pick an Adeptus Custodes unit and effectively give them fight on death on a 4-up, or if they're a walker, you get +1 to the roll, so effectively on a 3-up. So if you've buffed up, say, a Dreadnought with the Adamantine Talisman and it fights on death, they're an absolute monster. However, again, we're kind of leading into those sort of combat dreads you can get from Forge World, but again, a Contemptor can benefit from this as well. It's just a nice way of, if something does go down in combat, they can then get back up and do a little bit of damage, potentially, if you roll well. There's also Wrathful Advance, which is very nice, because it allows you to pile in D3+3 instead of the regular 3 inches, which is incredibly powerful if you want to sort of slingshot your stuff up the board and get them into fortuitous situations. Especially if you do have a Dreadnought that has that higher OC, if they can make that charge and then pile in a bit further, it might mean that they can tag other things or then get closer to objectives and all that good stuff. It just having any extra ways of gaining movement is always really powerful, so it's a nice trick to have up your sleeve. The next stratagem is called Unstoppable, and it's very interesting because it's very similar to the Knights of Iron we saw in the Dark Ages detachment. It allows an Adeptus Custodes vehicle or mounted unit to move through terrain. A bit of a theme appears to be emerging in some of these detachments that potentially might be a bit too much terrain on the board, so some of the faster moving units are now less restricted and you can get them to where you want them to be, which is very powerful indeed. Then potentially one of my favourite stratagems here, Relentless Persecution. This gives a unit that's a vehicle the ability to advance and shoot, which is very nice. However, if it's a walker, it can choose to shoot and charge when it advanced. Now, let me paint you a little picture. Imagine you're giving your +2 movement to one of your character dreadnoughts that you've given the Adamantine Talisman to. It can move faster, it can advance, it can then shoot, it can then charge, which is a nice combination of things to do, especially given you're an Adeptus Custodes dreadnought model. That is quite nice. So hopefully that will allow those character dreads to get up the board, in the opponent's face and sever some heads. And rounding out the stratagems, we have Punishment Inescapable. This gives an Adeptus Custodes unit the ability to ignore cover on their ranged attacks and ignore the modifiers to their hit rolls. This is very nice at just maintaining some of your lower AP weapons at getting the most out of them. Say you've got a unit of Alaris Custodes Terminators. So their spears and their axes and the ballistic grenade launchers, they tend to be quite low AP, so being able to ignore cover helps you kind of hurt your opponent just that little bit more, which is very useful at digging things out of cover and just in general getting units off the board. The Solar Spearhead then, what do I think of this new detachment? I do really like it in principle. I like anything that gives you kind of a kooky way to play the game, and I think it's nice to be able to buff up Adeptus Custodes dreadnoughts to make them like these ancient heroes, which is what they would be. However, there's not enough plastic vehicles in the Custodes range to really make this sort of a go-to, if you know what I mean. If you're lucky enough, like we are, to have access to a lot of the Forge World models that are really cool models, your Telemons, your Achilles, your Paladus Gravitax and all that stuff, then this is a really cool detachment kit. Allows you to run those vehicles in potentially a far more effective way and give them a little bit of a leg up, which I do think they needed and was missing from the Codex. However, if you only really want to use plastic, you've got access to the Rhino, the Land Raider, and the Contemptor, but that is about it. And this detachment isn't really going to make your rhinos sing because they are just rhinos. It is great for a Land Raider, but in an army that you're going to spend a lot of points on your infantry anyway, and because they're so resilient, it does feel like a lot of investment into one vehicle. However, if you do have access to a lot of the dreadnoughts, then this can be a really fun way of running the Custodes. You can run all of these dreadnoughts, have one as a warlord, have one as a character, have them advancing and charging up the board, ignoring cover, fighting on death. It's a really fun way to run the army, but we'll have to see it in action to really see what it can do. And speaking of seeing it in action, if you want to see these detachments on the battlefield going head to head against one another, check out our on-demand at tabletoptactics.tv, where we are rolling out these games with these new detachments as quickly as we possibly can. I'm really excited to try and make this work, and I think I'll try and, as soon as I next run Custodes, I'll give this a red hot go and try and run as many vehicles as possible. So wish me luck in that endeavor. And now let's head over to Beard and see what the Imperial Agents are cooking up. Welcome back everybody to Tabletop Tactics. Welcome back to the Grotmas celebrations that we're having all through the month. This has been a wild month
videos every day. We're trying to get these out as quick as we can for all of you good people out there. This is very exciting for us and feels like a bit of a new chapter for 40K, which is very exciting indeed. So today we're talking about the Agents of the Imperium, an interesting and mixed new faction, I would say, for 40K. A bit of a niche one, and today's new detachment is also very niche, but quite cool nonetheless. This is the Veiled Blade Elimination Force, and this is basically the most amped up you've seen assassins ever. So what does this all mean? The detachment rule is called Extremis Sanction, and what this allows your assassins to do is activate their once per battle abilities twice per battle, which is pretty nice. So that includes the Overkill, Soulless Horror, and Shieldbreaker abilities for your Eversaw Colexus and your Vindicare Assassin. It doesn't mention Reign of Confusion for the Calidus. I don't know if this is a typo or intentional. It feels like it might be left out by accident, but I'm sure we'll see that come up in the future. This is really nice because their once per battle abilities are very, very powerful indeed. The Vindicare being able to do its devastating wounds on the Exus rifle twice per battle is savage. Overkill on the Eversaw is hilarious. I don't know if he'll survive long enough for that to go off, but if it does, that's very powerful. And then finally, the Soulless Horror is also quite good. Probably less impactful than the rest, but as we've seen in the past, battle shock tests can often be pretty devastating in certain points, so nice to be able to do it twice. Well, it remains to be seen if the Calidus will also get the Reign of Confusion twice per battle. It feels like it isn't unreasonable, but that remains to be seen. And the second part of this are the assassin's extremis abilities. Now these work in the same way that enhancements do, but the twist here is that they have to be selected when you choose any of these assassins. There's no choice. They must be amped up to their maximum potential, which is very, very cool indeed. They are quite pricey for what they are. They're at least 35 points and up to 45 points, but think of it as just an assassin plus rather than an enhancement. It makes them far more potent than they ordinarily would be. We'll start off then with decoy targets. So this is for your Calidus assassin. You can do this twice per battle in your movement phase. You can select one other infantry model that's on the battlefield and not in engagement range of any enemy units. That model is then counted as being destroyed. This is really interesting and gives a solution to some of the problems we face sometimes with assassins, where you put them somewhere very important and then they sort of stay stuck there for the rest of the game. If you do this early doors, you still have lots of infantry units on the battlefield, you can really move your Calidus around quite quickly. It's a really interesting ability and gives you a bit less of a headache when you're thinking about where to deploy or where to deep strike. Next we have Esoteric Explosives. This is an interesting one for the Colexus assassin. Each time the grenade stratagem is selected to be used on this assassin, mortal wounds are triggered on 3s rather than 4s. So you've got a pretty good chance of doing some decent damage with the grenade strat for your Colexus assassin. Put that on top of the Animus Speculum and he's got a decent amount of ranged wound outputs. It's 40 points, but it's pretty cool. We then have intraneural biotech for the Eversaw assassin. This allows him to do the counter-offensive or heroic intervention stratagem for free once per battle. Now, considering you can do overkill twice now with this new detachment, that means that he's a bit of a scary target if your opponent thinks about charging him. So they're going to need to think twice because he can put out a lot of damage now. He's able to do overkill twice per battle, and in the absence of command points and you can still use counter-offensive, that's pretty scary. And then finally we have micro melter rounds for the Vindicare assassin. Micro melter rounds. What a glorious thing to say. That's very nice. This means that the model's Exus rifle has the anti-monster 4 and anti-vehicle 4 abilities. Boo! That's pretty damn good. So again, Shieldbreaker being able to be used twice is really, really tasty because you've got the +1 to wound anyway, but any successful wounds score a crit. So that's D3 +3 devastating wounds being able to be done twice in a battle. This means he's way, way more useful than he was previously. Being a character sniper, he was a really good bet anyway to deal with characters from a distance, but being able to chip away at monsters and vehicles or sort of get those last few wounds off is amazing. So, I mean, it's 45 points, but brrr, the assassins are powered up. Let's then cover the stratagems. Now, these aren't necessarily specifically for assassins, which is quite nice. So it does give a little bit of play to your other units as well. The first one is prime target. This can be done on any Agent of the Imperium unit, and it means that until the end of the phase, in the shooting phase or the fight phase, any attacks that target a character, you can reroll the wound roll of 1. If this is being done by an assassin model that's targeting the enemy warlord, you can reroll wounds entirely. This is 1 CP with all of their new abilities. Your warlord's dead. You understand me? Your warlord is dead, and their family's dead, and their ancestors are dead. They're all dead. Then we have the Hyperstims stratagem. This one is 2 CP, so it's a bit more pricey. This applies to any of your agent's characters. This is done in your opponent's shooting phase or in the fight phase, and when they're selected as an eligible target, you then increase the toughness by 1, which is quite nice. Now, the big thing here is that if the unit that's being targeted is an Eversaw assassin, they also get a 4-up Feel No Pain. Will Sapping Salvo is the next one. That is also fun to say. This is 1 CP, and this affects any of your agent's infantry units. It gives their ranged weapons sustained 1, but if this is being done on a Calexis assassin, the damage characteristic of the Animus Speculum is 3 rather than D3. It's 3. So that's quite nice, on top of being able to do the grenade stratagem and popping off mortal wounds on 3s. Next one is Orbital Oversight. This one is also 1 command point. You can do this in your opponent's shooting phase when they select an infantry unit as a target. It means that they can only be the target if the enemy unit is within 18 inches. On top of that, if the unit has lone operative, like your assassins, they can only be targeted within 6 inches. So it gives that another layer of protection. Very nice indeed. Next up, we have blind grenades, and this is done in your opponent's charge phase. Another sort of reactive stratagem. It's quite interesting, this. 1 CP, and you can do this on any Agents of the Imperium grenades unit, which is most of the infantry units, or on a Vindicare assassin specifically. What this means is that until the end of the charge phase, you have to subtract 1 from any charge rolls made into that unit. If it's specifically a Vindicare assassin, you subtract 2 from the charge roll. Very cool. And finally, we have the Ensnaring Trap stratagem. This one is also 1 CP and is also done in your opponent's charge phase. So this could have devastating effects if your opponent is willing to charge your army. You select this on one of your agent's infantry units, and if they are within 6 inches of an enemy unit at the end of their charge phase, they're able themselves to declare a charge. Now, this can be done on any infantry unit, but in addition, if it's being done on a Calidus assassin, if they make a successful charge as a result of using this stratagem, they get +1 to wound in melee, which is really, really nice. So there's some really interesting counter type stratagems within this detachment here to keep your unit safe and just to up the potency, especially of the assassins. So there we have it. That is the Veiled Blade Elimination Force detachment for the Agents of the Imperium. A bit of a niche one within a very niche army. However, if you have 4 assassins, I don't think there's any way of having any more fun than you can in this detachment. The assassins are already very fun to use, but when you add on the mandatory extra death that you have to take with this detachment, it makes them the most potent they've ever been, so I love it. I would have loved it if they added in things like Land Raiders and Grey Knights, Dread Knights, and some of the more big beefy anti-tank stuff, but maybe we'll see that in the future. But for now, we have our assassin-laced Christmas gift from the Grotmas calendar. Thank you for joining here today. We're going to be releasing one of these every single day throughout the entirety of Grotmas, so join us here on YouTube for more of these every day. Hit subscribe and notifications so you don't miss any, and in the meantime, consider joining us on demand because we're going to start rolling out all of our battle reports with these new detachments in the not too distant future. I have been your Agent of the Imperium, Chaos Lord Beard, and I will see you back here very soon for some more Grotmas fun. Enjoying today's video? Here's a quick look at what we've released this week for our on-demand members. These videos join a huge library of exclusive content that grows every week for our on-demand community. If you want instant access to all of these videos and more, head over to table.tactics.tv or download our app and sign up today. And currently, we have an introductory offer for new customers, so there's never been a better time to join on demand.